Welcome to Inside the Cutting Room with Bobbie Osteen, a conversation with Dana E. Glauberman, ACE. Take it away, Bobbie.
Dana,
Bobbie.
I meet you in the flesh.
I
We
know.
talked for hours, but this is the first time we're meeting. Very exciting. And thank you all for being here. EDITFEST is so awesome, and thank you, American Cinema Editors. And most of all, I want to thank Jenny McCormick, who is the heart and soul of ACE. I literally can't imagine what ACE would be without her. So thank you for being you, Jenny. Right? A fellow fan of Jenny's. So Dana, you are an incredibly talented person, but you are quite modest, very modest, too
Very.
So I'm going to force you out of your modesty here. So you told me recently that someone said to you, I was watching the scene, and in the classic Dana Glauberman fashion, now you have to finish the sentence.
You cut to the right place at the right time. You cut to exactly where I wanted to be. You cut to the close-ups when I wanted to go to close-up.
You know how it is when you watch editing, it's very hard to judge it because you don't know what the quality of the footage was or how much control the editor had over the cut. But the one thing I notice as an audience is when I'm dying to see a person and the editor doesn't cut to them. And that's when you know, that's bad editing. And, dialogue scenes, which is something you do par excellence, and comedy, whether it's comedy or drama, they're the hardest things to edit. It's so challenging because, especially crucial scenes where it's so delicate, and there's so many balls you're juggling, and so much goes into it, even though it's instinctual, it's all in your head. So the character arcs, where the characters are in the story arcs, what the character wants, what the characters want from each other. It's all factoring in every time you make a cut. So who you cut to and how long you stay on them seems like a relatively simple concept, but it's so complicated. And kudos to you for being a master at it, really.
Oh, thank you.
It's subtext, it's psychology, it's also, tracking just the emotional life of the characters. And so, we will be talking about other genres. We're going to get into Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett, but I just want to say this, what you're kind of known for is a really incredible, it's sort of, I said what separates, usually you say men for the boys, women from the girls, I would say in this case. So now that I've said how awesome you are, I want to rewind and start from the beginning of your story. So you were always interested in photography and film. And you got a little bit of a kind of sobering message from a neighbor who was in the business when you were young. Can you?
Yeah, I love photography, and I think there was a moment where I was interested in becoming a cinematographer and didn't know much about it.
Yeah.
But I remember talking to a neighbor who kind of discouraged me because I remember specifically him saying to me, it's a very tough business as a woman, or a tough field as a woman to get into.
Right.
And that kind of discouraged me a little bit, but I kept that in the back of my mind. Mm-hmm. And I get the photography thing from my dad, who's sitting back there. My parents are back there. And I also loved doing jigsaw puzzles. And I'm sure many of you have heard this story before because I talk about it often. But when I was a kid, I used to love doing jigsaw puzzles. And I would lay them all out in the dining room and just get lost in it. And still to this day, if I see a jigsaw puzzle sitting on somebody's table, I'll sit down and start finding pieces. And so when I went to undergrad, I went to UC Santa Barbara, graduated a long time ago. But I took one film production class, and the only thing that I liked doing was editing. because I was working with my hands. It was Super 8mm film. I had a little tiny plastic butt splicer. I was in a room by myself, not in front of a crowd of people. And it just took me back to my childhood of doing these jigsaw puzzles. There's one way to put a puzzle together, 1,000-piece puzzle together, but there's hundreds of ways to cut a movie together or a TV show. And I just was drawn to that. So that's kind of how my path as an editor.
Here.
What?
There's a little foreshadowing with the puzzle. You will find that momentarily.
Sorry, I jumped ahead a little.
No, you didn't. It's great because it informs, who you are and what your motivation was, and knowing what you want and how editing fulfilled not only your gifts but your motivation to become an editor. I just want to also briefly talk about something which I've brought up with a lot of editors, and it's always good for younger editors to hear this. When I say to an editor, are you ever insecure, or do you ever just start a new picture and think, I think I'm a fraud, or I don't know what I'm doing? And every editor says yes, no matter how, except for Jill Bilcock. I don't know if you know who she is, but she's an Australian editor. She did, Moulin Rouge and all these great films, and she just looked at me like, I don't know what you're talking about. But everybody else says it. And, maybe it's the nature of being an artist, and if you don't question yourself, then you don't have that edge and that drive. But so Dana, one of the things I love about your process is you said you don't have assistants build string outs of line reads. You call yourself slow because you need to, and perfectionist, but can you talk about why you do not do that and what your process is?
Yeah, of course. A lot of editors will have their assistants basically build out a role on the Avid, or a sequence that is repetitive. It's line after line after line after line. What I find is they miss those very intricate moments or pauses, or it's literally line, and you don't get those reactions, and you don't get those really special moments before an actor speaks or after an actor speaks that you can pull as a reaction shot. And that's why I personally like to build my own line read reel, and I take lines. I take lines that I like. I go through every single footage of dailies. I go through every take. I go through every line read. I don't even use script sync when I edit because I like to look at everything. Those are those special moments that you actually find that you can use later on as a reaction shot, or you can use as just a beat before the actor speaks or after. And when I have had my assistants do it, I never use it because my brain can't handle how quickly it goes. I need to breathe.
Yeah, and it's those little nuggets, those lucky accents. So much of great films and all media really is finding those moments, the unplanned things, and you wouldn't find them otherwise. So
No.
I love that. I really do.
Takes me a lot longer to cut a scene because I do go through everything, but I also kind of pride myself in that because because of those special moments that people don't necessarily take the time to look for.
Yeah, and you said you second guess yourself a lot. And then what did you say?
Excuse my French.
and you usually say, what did you show the director the second guest version, and it's like, why did you? The first one was so much better.
Yeah.
I mean, and have you learned like over time to trust your instincts and respect them?
I have.
Yeah.
However, I still second guess myself.
Yeah.
Like, yes, trust your instincts is always the way to go in anything.
Yes.
But at the same time, I am scared shitless when I start a new job.
Yeah.
I think that oh my God. I mean, starting Mandalorian was the scariest thing of my entire life because there was this, and we'll get into that later, but it's a whole new world, not only with Star Wars, but with the volume, and I'm not excuse me for admitting this, but I'm not the biggest of Star Wars fanatics.
But they
I've
liked
seen the
that
movies,
about you.
but
They
but they
liked-
did like that.
Yeah,
The
you
fact
were
that
fresh air.
I was
Yeah.
fresh eyes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was wonderful. Very smart choice.
Thank you.
So now Dana is starting the business, and you're basically a PA, or should we say, AKA unpaid intern, right? Is that?
I wasn't an unpaid intern yet. I did get my first job out of school. Was a hostess at Stanley's in Sherman Oaks. But right after that, I got hired by a producer who I'm still friends with, Paul Goldman, at Hearst Entertainment. Hearst Entertainment was a TV production and entertainment company, and he was the head of post-production at the company, and he hired me as his production assistant, and I put 18,000 miles on my car in 8 months, learned all sorts of little, back routes, but I was, it was back in the day still of film. I was, carrying film reels from the cutting room to the projection booth, but I met a ton of people, which I think is really important to stay in touch with all these people that, for all of you starting out, stay in touch with people. It's really important to reach out and just kind of went to him after 8 months and I said, I can't be in my car anymore. I want to get started with my career. And so he called Mark Westmore, editor he was cutting a movie of the week I think it was called Ned Blessing, and asked if I could intern. That's when I was an unpaid intern. If I could just go kind of hang out and learn the ropes of a cutting room. And that was my first sort of entry into a cutting room, and I loved it.
And now you met Danny Kahn Sr.
I met Dan Kahn Sr.
And what got you the job?
So Dan Kahn Sr. was working right next door, and no, Senior wasn't. Junior was.
Oh, Junior was.
Junior was, and his dad was looking for an assistant editor, and he and I got, he and I struck up a friendship, and he introduced me to his dad, and I went and interviewed for a movie of the week called The Man Upstairs for CBS, and how I remember that, I don't know, but I went and interviewed him at his house, and we were talking about the editing process, and I said something about jigsaw puzzles, and he was like, "That's exactly right," and I got the job.
I love that. So we're going to talk about, you may tear up a little bit, the wonderful Artie Schmidt, whose funeral is actually today. I did an event with him. I got to know him. He's a truly brilliant editor and lovely man, and was a mentor to you. You met him on Birdcage. Mm-hmm. Initially for 2 weeks, your job was to teach him the Avid. One of the things I love, before we talk about what a great mentor he was and what you learned from him, I wanted to just mention, I think it was really smart of you to talk to him she was trying to explain things like the timeline in film terms so he could relate to it. So the analogy to a timeline would be, what would you say to him?
I would basically say your blue line in your timeline is your sync block.
Yeah.
And everything to the right is, and everything to the, so it's a little bit backwards because everything to the left is everything that you just played, whereas on film, everything to the right was what you just played. But he was able to relate to how I was able to explain things to him because I had the film background. And he was able to understand what I was saying because the Birdcage was his first entry into Avid and electronic editing.
So can you talk a bit about what you learned from, he would show you his work and explain why he made certain edits. Mm-hmm. But can you talk about what you learned from him as an editor and as a person working in the cutting? Because so much of our conversations are always about not just being an editor as an artist, but also navigating the cutting room and how to deal with your assistants and how to deal with the politics. And it's a huge part of the job. And he was such a class act, such a gentleman. But
really was.
just whatever you want to say about...
I never, ever saw him raise his voice or get upset about anything. He was the most even-keeled man, just incredibly nice, always wanting to pay it forward, would always call people into the cutting room and share things, which is something that I do now. You know, I'm always including my assistants and even production assistants. You know, I want the whole crew. I want everybody's take on what I have just cut. So he was. Ugh.
And what was funny is years later, you were at a screening in Santa Barbara of Juno, and she said, Artie, do you ever look at your films and say, ugh, why did I make that cut? And like second guess yourself. What did he say to you?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Sometimes don't like to look at their work because they're like...
And you know what? At the end of the day, it just goes to show you our work is never done because we're constantly cutting things. And that's why sometimes I don't like watching my stuff after it's out because I'm kicking myself for cutting something a certain way or not taking off those 3 additional frames or staying on something a bit longer. So I am constantly second-guessing myself with even after a movie or show is released.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about another set of mentors. You were working on, you got hired as an assistant on Father's Day. Ivan Reitman was the director. And the editors were Wendy Brickmont and
Sheldon Kahn.
Can you tell it's sort of a comedy rule, but it can be a rule in general about the comma?
Yes, so I remember when Jason and I were working on Thank You for Smoking, and we had a lot of extra things at the end of scenes. And Shelley and Ivan both looked at us and said, get rid of that shot, or suggested, didn't demand, but their analogy was put a comma after a scene, not a period. And what that basically means is don't go to that extra reaction shot at the end because that slows the show down. It slows the story down. You want to just keep the train rolling. So if you just put a comma on, get rid of that reaction shot, it takes you to the next scene and you're off to the races. And I tell my assistants that all the time.
Yeah, it's great, right? So also on that is a pivotal moment for Dana because she met Jason Reitman, Ivan Reitman's son, who you helped him out also with some short films. And can you talk about how you got to know him and then?
Yeah, so when I was an assistant editor on Father's Day that Ivan directed, as well as many other movies after that. And Jason would come into the cutting room at the end of our day. And he would use our avids because he wanted to be a filmmaker too. He originally went to medical school and decided that wasn't for him. And his dad went back east, and I don't think I told you this, but his dad went back east and had a talk with him and said, there's not enough magic in medical school for you. Come back to LA.
Wow.
And he went to film school. And so Jason would come in and work on our avids on his short films that he was doing because he really wanted to make a name for himself and not be Ivan Reitman's son. He wanted to make his own path. And so he would come into the cutting room at the end of the day and I would help him out on the avid when, I was finishing my day, and he would ask me questions and I would help him, and that started a long and wonderful relationship. When he started to think about Thank You for Smoking, there were many people who went to him and said, hire Dana. And Shelley, anyone who knows Shelley Kahn, Shelley always tells me, I told Jason to hire you, and if you didn't work out, I would cut your movie for free. And
wow.
Thankfully it worked out.
That's awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
Mentors are the best. And I have to say also, as a side note, editors are wonderful mentors. Reach out to them, follow through with them, partly because their editors are awesome in general, but editors also remember where they came from, and they're humbled by the experience and how challenging it is, and so they're wonderful. I mean, and it's very important to watch. They'll take you in and show you what they've done, and in the digital age, it's more challenging. It's a concerted effort because you're not handing them strips of film. The editor has to really, so you have to pursue that and make them show you, and then try to edit stuff and have them critique your work.
And it's a little bit difficult with confidentiality things now too. Like, some of the movies I wouldn't be able to bring anyone in, but there are a lot of editors out there that are more than happy to help out. I mean, I tell a lot of people this: find your favorite editor, reach out to them, send them an email on Facebook or note on Instagram, because that's those are the days that we're in now. But reach out, and you'll be surprised at how many people actually respond.
And if they don't respond right away, keep doing it.
You can also go through their agents.
Yeah, but they a lot of times they don't answer you right away because they're just busy. It's not that they don't want to. You just have to keep bugging and be a squeaky wheel.
Yes.
Very important.
Yes.
So now you begin this wonderful, how many years? This is like 17 or 18 years collaboration.
Yeah, 2005, I think, was Thank You for Smoking.
Yeah, and you actually knew him a little before that too.
Yeah.
And can we just talk before we're going to start showing clips, but I just wanted to touch on a wonderful subject too. If you're fortunate enough to have a long-term collaboration with a director, I sort of make the analogy of a marriage. There's what you develop over time is trust, shorthand. The trust thing is a big thing, so you feel it happening. At the beginning, you're sort of feeling each other out. But do you want to say anything in general about that collaboration and how you grew to have this comfortable?
And you also have to be able to be comfortable spending 12 plus hours a day, 5 days a week in a room. I mean, because you end up becoming work spouses in a way, just this kind of spouse, not anything else, obviously. Sorry. But yeah, you have to have the trust and communication. And a lot of times, like on No Strings Attached, when I was cutting for Ivan, I had worked with him for so long that he would literally be in the middle of a note, verbally, a verbal note to me, where I was already on the Avid doing it, and by the time he finished the note, it was already done, and he was always so shocked at how quickly I was able to do it. But that's it. There comes to be this great shorthand that when you have that long collaboration with somebody, and it's happened with Jason a million times as well. But when you have that shorthand and great communication, and this long-standing collaboration, that's what it is. Jason presented an award to me, and in his speech, he said something like, my relationship with Dana is one of the longest relationships I've ever had. And it's true. I mean, I had seen him through all sorts of relationships. So.
Yeah, and it's important to be a nice person anyway, but, you want to be, if two possible people are up for a job and one of them is really collaborative and easy to work with and open and flexible, that person is going to get the job and go along in their career. It's a small business, and your reputation follows you. Yeah, Dana, you're awesome. I'm going to say it too many times, maybe not enough. But also this telepathic thing you're talking about, I think it's also interesting. Like, editors are always right, usually, but there may be. There may be something you want to bring up that the director's wrong, or you feel, or just you feel, you pick your battles. That's like marriage too. Pick your battles. You don't fight over everything, even if you're right. But you You have to, if you know the director, you know about timing, and this is not the day to bring it up, or I just can feel resistant. I'm going to wait, because then you'll get your point through and you'll get what you want. If you have to also, the inverse of that is if a director says, I want it upside down and backwards, and you think this is ridiculous, it might work, actually. So
it might work, or another idea might come of it.
Right, exactly.
But I've also, if a director is asking for something specific and you completely disagree with it, I think it's important to not just say, no, you're wrong.
Right.
Or you shouldn't say, no, you're wrong. It's better to actually try the note, make that note the best that you can make it, and then discuss it after. And then you can say, this is why I don't think this works as well as this other version, or let's take this and try something.
I mean, it's amazing sometimes that you just can't believe something worked when it just seems impossible. So we're going to start on Thank You for Smoking. How many of you have seen it, by the way? Awesome. Okay, that's good. First Eddie nomination. So this is a satirical piece. How did it preview?
Not very well. We previewed, I think it was at Culver Studios, and we were all super excited by it, but because of the content, because it's a satire, we did not score well. And if I remember correctly, because it was a long time ago, most people, there weren't a lot of definitely recommends, and the reason was that even though the audience liked it, they didn't have people that would understand it or appreciate it the way they did. And they just, I don't know what's wrong with their friends, but they didn't think that their friends would enjoy it.
And I love that, because this is, you kind of see, we're going to show 3 films from Jason Reitman, and I love that you talk about how he doesn't want to tell you how to feel as an audience. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, Juno's a perfect example. Well, Thank You for Smoking. Is it for smoking or against smoking? Jason does not want to ever tell the audience how to feel. He wants the audience to come to conclusions on their own. Juno, pro-life.
Right.
You come to that conclusion on your own. There's no right or wrong way. There's no right or wrong opinion. Your opinion is your opinion. But he has always been very adamant about not telling the audience how to feel.
But what's also interesting, like Aaron Eckhart's character, Nick, you could view him as unsympathetic, and as an editor, I have to say, given that, Up in the Air as well, George Clooney's character. I mean, these are characters that are complicated, and you could say potentially unsympathetic. And I think what you've contributed as an editor is, given that he says it's up to the audience how to feel, there's this space for finding the soul in the character. As an editor, you allow the audience. I mean, because I always feel so strongly, and sorry for America, but I think American films tend to be even more this way, and maybe more than ever, is don't insult your audience, Don't spell everything out, and either with words or with the way they're edited or written. Let the audience decide for themselves. It's a much more interesting and engaging experience. Mm-hmm. And so these movies have that thing where you're kind of figuring it out on your own, and you can walk away at the end and be a little ambivalent. And then you go out to dinner or go out to drinks with your friends and you talk about it. Those are interesting films where they sit with you and you don't have this pat. And his films do have that. They leave you with that wonderful sort of complicated emotions. It's great.
Yeah, it's great to, like you say, go out to dinner with your friends and continue to talk about it.
I mean, Oh, go on.
No, that was it.
No, I was about to say this because the very end of this movie, the character literally says to the camera, Michael Jordan plays ball, Charles Manson kills people, I talk. Everyone has a talent. Now, that's pretty out there. So, and what's interesting about his character is that we're left with feeling kind of, I mean, it's satirical, so there's this sort of edgy kind of distance you have to, looking at the world in a ironic way. But then the sun is the soul, and so he does that. It's very interesting. Or you do that
It does
together.
have a heart.
Yeah, he does have it. He finds the heart, but it may not be in the way you think it's going to be. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to show a clip now. This is very. Do you want to set up what you did as placeholders, or do you want to talk about it after?
Well, let's talk after.
Okay, so we'll run the clip, please. Thank you.
People, what is going on out there? I look down this table, all I see are white flags.
I see so much in there that I want to change.
Did you hear what she said? She said there's some cuts I want to change. Dana, give yourself a break. So explain what you did there. That
there was the jump cuts are a big theme in this movie. The classroom scene. We shot with 2 cameras, and it was start wide and pop in. Mm-hmm. This one, when Aaron Eckhart is actually going around the table, and there's those 3 back-to-back jump cuts of him talking about Forrest Gump, and I just had that there as a placeholder. I didn't like it originally. I like it now, but I didn't like it originally, and I just had it there as a placeholder as this is the take I want to use, the line read, but I needed to go through more dailies to actually see what I could put in there. But I showed Jason, and he loved it. And I was like, really? And he said yes. And that's the way it stayed. And I think it totally works because the jump cuts are a theme throughout the whole movie.
And there's a certain momentum in this movie that's, and it's like the style, it's like in movies when you create, it's kind of like a language, and the audience embraces it and comes to expect it and understand it, and you notice it at first, and then it just becomes part of the experience. Yep. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, now we're going to talk about Juno. When you read the script, this is 2007 now. That was 2005. Now you read the script. And what did you think?
I loved the script. I thought it was hilarious. Diablo Cody is brilliant. And in talking to Jason about it, he knew. I mean, Jason's so good with actors and casting, and he knew exactly who he wanted to cast as Juno, and every single person in this movie, every single actor became who they were playing. And honestly, it was probably one of the easiest things that I had cut, only because of that. Everybody became the character that they were playing, and everything just fell into place. So I loved the script.
But I have to say that when I watched it again, I'm going to repeat what I said at the beginning, that everything you did, Dana, it's like you're always where I wanted to be. It's like, it's just, it's not like you expect it necessarily. You're also surprised by things, but it's such perfection in terms of the choices you made. And the scene we're going to show, I want to talk about it before. You can say something too, but I just, in appreciation of you. What I love about this scene is it's about halfway through the film, and it's a really delicate, pivotal moment, because here you have Polly, played by Michael Cera, and then Elliot Page playing Juno. And their relationship is so weird because, she got pregnant by having sex one time. They weren't a couple, and then she kind of dumped him, and he's in love with her, but she's having a baby and they're not keeping it together. So it's all so tenuous and strange and scary. And they're doing this dance in this scene where they're protecting their hearts. And so what Dana does so beautifully, I want to talk about before so you can watch it. Dana, first of all, I love when you trust, great rule of editing is when something's working, don't cut. When it's playing, just, if there's body language or just a master shot or it can be a close-up, it can be anything. Trust that it's working and don't cut. And what Dana does so beautifully is there's these master shots where you see the body language and the staging of her awkwardness sitting next to him and all that. But there's a moment where he gives her this compliment and he's showing his heart, and you have this punch in to her close-up, which is so effective. And then there's this back and forth where they're both navigating and she doesn't know how to feel and he's just exposed himself, and it's also such a tenuous, scary thing, and you're just feeling everything so deeply because you're holding on moments when you're supposed to, you're punching in when you're supposed to, then the shot is a little looser when the tension lets up a little, and you keep going back and forth between that. It's just masterful.
Between the two-shot and
the looser over the shoulder, the tight close-ups, the master, but every time you do it, it's like perfect.
And I mean, when watching the scene, there's so many different places that you could cut into an over or a close-up, but I chose to stay wide and go in when it counts.
Very important.
And this is right after she finds out that the Lorings are getting a divorce, or that he's leaving her. So she's heartbroken.
The people that are adopting.
Who has anyone not seen Juno?
Oh, has anyone not seen Juno? Let's shame you. No. Oh, okay. But yeah, so we told enough of the plot.
I think so.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. So, but honestly, if you haven't seen it, it's an incredible film. And the other thing, when I was talking earlier about dialogue scenes, it's like that. Having your finger on the audience's pulse, just knowing what they want at every moment it's such an important job for the editor to be the audience and feel what they want to see when they want to see it. And this is a beautiful example. So we can run the clip. Thank you.
We seem to be getting pregnanter these days.
I set up this whole private adoption, and this married couple in St. Cloud, they're gonna be the parents. So it's
Michael Cera in that moment is just killer, and he deserves his close-up.
Absolutely. I don't remember. I mean, like I said earlier, everybody brought their A game. Even the crew, the behind the scenes, all the actors, and they became who they were performing, and it was just a beautiful thing. And I don't remember how many takes we did on any particular setup, but it wasn't a lot.
Does he shoot a lot of takes? Or
Jason, generally not, no.
Yeah. And just the way they protect their hearts, and then they give a little, it's just that you're so with them, you know what I mean?
Yeah, your heart breaks in the moment, too.
Did you want to?
Yeah, I was just thinking about staying, don't cut if you don't need to. I think I told you a story about when I was editing No Strings Attached for Ivan. And, Jason and Ivan have such different styles. It's, old film school, not old as in he's old or was old, but, the old timers versus the digital age of TikTok and Instagram. And even though when we did the movies, it was, but anyway, I remember cutting a scene that's not in the movie anymore in No Strings Attached. And I think it was the first scene that I cut for Ivan, and I was scared shitless. Like, here I am. I was an assistant editor for so long for him. Yes, I was cutting for his son, with his son, for his son, but here I am actually cutting for this man who I felt like I was growing up with. You know, he saw me from, like, you know, not necessarily infancy, but that's kind of what it felt like, because the progression of the trajectory of my career with him. And I was excited to show him this one scene, and, you know, he's all into don't cut if you don't need to. But of course I cut it up. The very first shot of the scene, and it was this beautiful tracking shot, and I cut it up, and he looked at me, he said, "What the fuck are you doing? You're making me crazy with all these cuts."
You must have died.
And I just about, like, I was mortified. But we made the scene great, and then we took it out of the movie. But
she was talking about it, and I'm running the film. It's like, where's the scene?
I had to go back and look at an old continuity.
It's your fault. Sorry. But do you think that you did that because you were nervous? Or,
I think so.
Yeah.
And I was overthinking.
Overthinking.
Which I do all the time. I overthink every single cut.
Yeah.
And second guess myself. So there you go.
It's okay. We all do that. I love that story, though. So we're now going to talk about Up in the Air. How many of you have seen that? So great. So, you know, again, I love this film editorially because there's a lot of stylist content, and so stylistically, there are times when it's very fast-cutting and very rat-a-tat, and then there's times where you completely slow down because of the content. And the contrast, you're going to see the contrast, and it actually is in reference to the evolution of a character, which is so great. But can you talk a little about the nature of this production? You worked differently with Jason on this one because of the logistics of it and the time crunch.
Yeah, we shot this movie in 5 cities around the country, and we had a very, very, very tight post schedule. I don't remember specifically, it may have been 6 months from the time we started shooting to the time we finished. And so Jason was all over the country. I stayed here, and Jason would fly in on the weekends, work with me on on one or two or both days of the weekend, and then go back to shooting.
What had you done previously? You would only work with him at the end, and you would send him stuff, right?
So, you know, on the previous 2 films, Jason generally never really liked me being on set because he didn't want me to be influenced by anything that I heard or saw on set. He always wanted me to go with, you know, a fresh eye look at the dailies and see what I came up with. Sometimes it would be something that he had never thought of before. Sometimes it would be spot on to what he was thinking, and sometimes I'd be way off on the, you know, in the deep end, and we would have to rework things. But I think Jason's favorite part of filmmaking is editing. And which I kind of find, I hear that a lot about directors. I think a lot of directors actually like editing the most.
So you would send him things, and if there was a problem, you know, you might have a back and forth about it, but basically you didn't actually go in the cutting room and start working on it until the end, but in this case you were working on weekends as he was shooting.
Yes,
so
exactly.
It was different.
Exactly.
And can you talk about, so this story is about, I mean, what does he do for a living?
He fires people.
He fires people, and it was, you know, it was recession era, or
So that was the other thing. We interviewed. Production put an ad in the local papers of all the cities that we were shooting in, looking for people, real people, who had lost their jobs, and we interviewed them. I think it was most of the interviews were done by Michael Bug, who was our UPM, and and we filmed all these people. We got waivers, and it was just heartbreaking. We had hours and hours and hours of footage. And sifting through all of that footage was not just a daunting thing to do, but it was also heartbreaking because there were, people whose lives were on the. It was just hearing their stories were terrible. They all got Taft-Hartley'd into SAG, the ones that we ended up using, but there were women that would just break out in hives in talking about their story, their family, they needed the money. It was a tough movie to work on, but it was fun at the same time because what's so bad about looking at George Clooney on your screen every day?
Oh. Seriously. But what did you do with those interviews in the movie? Like, how did you use them?
We intercut them. We have these little montages of, people talking about their experiences of getting fired.
Yeah, and it's beautifully integrated because it's sort of it's sort of taking documentary style thing, and it doesn't feel it doesn't take you out of it. So we're actually going to show 3 clips from this film because there's a sort of sequential thing. This is also, you got a BAFTA nomination, Eddie nomination for this. Oh, Juno, also Eddie nomination. You said you whittled it down to pieces, these interviews. So the opening, do you want to say anything about the opening? Or
the opening is just a fun little montage of Ryan Bingham going through security at the airport, and I take his advice when I go through security at the airport. Don't pick a line that has a stroller. Don't pick a line with old people.
Yeah, you actually, it's very instructive. And that I had that suitcase too.
You do?
Well, yeah, that's what stewardesses use, and I was told to buy it. So there you go. But it's a beautifully edited montage, and it sort of, like I said, the style is content thing. It sort of sets the tone of this sort of momentum of this sort of weird life. Right away what his life is. It's very efficient too, and incredibly entertaining.
And the style of it is just, it's kind of like a dance. It's a fast dance.
Yes.
And, just like the sound and the music had so much to do with it also, just bringing it all together.
Yeah, it's dance with choreography and music. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we can run the clip. Thank you. Was that storyboarded, or how was the planning of that?
No, Jason never, until Ghostbusters Afterlife, he never did storyboards. Mm-hmm.
Did it evolve a lot, or?
This is kind of a theme of this, if I remember correctly. You'll hear that a lot through the rest of this. I think we shot 2 speeds, and so there was a lot of double cameras and just finding those short beats that sort of fit together with the progression of him going through the airport, packing and going through the airport.
So the next scene we're going to show is early on in the film, where you're introduced to Natalie and Anna Kendrick's character, and again, the style reflects content because she is very confident. Can you explain what her job was, how she is introduced?
So the scene prior to what we're about to show, she was pitching, because Ryan Bingham goes to fire people in person. He's flying all over the world, and she is brought in to actually introduce a way of firing people over computer, over the internet. So that means that Ryan is grounded, he's not going anywhere, and Ryan is very upset by this.
And she's one of these people, some of which you won't see in the clips, but she has her whole life figured out. She has, the guy she's dating is like she describes it, I can't even, it's like a resume perfect guy.
Yeah.
It's so, she thinks that you can just do that in life. You can just make a decision and everything is you can control everything. You know, there will be a reckoning, but at this point, she's walking in and she's hot stuff. And
She's very confident.
very confident. It's reflected in the editing, which is very, very.
A lot of overlapping dialogue.
Yeah.
A lot of just, similar to the quick cuts that we just saw, a lot of overlapping dialogue and quick cuts and conversations going back and forth.
So it's almost like the editing style is her character, and then you'll see that changes as her character changes. So we can run this clip now. Thank you.
Tell me you're not taking this seriously.
That's why we brought the entire company in from the road, because we're not taking this seriously.
There is a methodology to what I do. There's a reason why it works.
I actually remember when I first cut that scene, I cut to the timing of how they were performing it. And so there were a lot more pauses in there. There aren't a lot in this, but I remember Jason actually saying to me, I want this to be quick. I want it to be overlapping dialogue almost on top of each other back and forth. And so slowly I kept, whittling it down, and this is where we ended up.
I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had actually made a note of that because I thought, so you got the pace and you got this sort of momentum, but you also, the essence of their characters is there because the basis was keying it off the rhythm of their performance and the nature of her performance, and that's why it's so good. It's not just flashy. It's like you're really with them.
And you also get her confidence, and he keeps shutting her down, and
So now we're about halfway in, I think.
I think so, yes.
And everything is changing. First of all, that guy dumped her, the resume perfect guy.
And she breaks down in crazy hysterics in the middle of a lobby.
Actually, this is an hour into it, this next clip.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and she's seeing the sort of shallowness of his life. She's just getting a little, but the reckoning is really going to happen in this scene in a way that it hasn't before. And it's, again, the classic Dana Glauberman fashion. You're going to see it at play here because, once again, Dana is just the way you let things breathe, the way you let things sit and resonate with her character, so the audience is just completely inside her when it's happening, is masterful editing, and we'll run the clip and show you.
What's going on here?
I've been looking at those great numbers over the last few days. I thought maybe we should just nut up and give this a try.
We use a little more time.
Well, you got to leave the nest at some point, huh?
This is a real company, Craig. We're here to do some damage.
You could literally hear a pin drop in here.
Yeah, you were talking about when you see screenings of it and the audience would just...
It's, heartbreaking.
like a knife in your...
Yeah.
When she crosses out that name and there's all those other...
But so much is, she did so good with, her performance is fantastic. Like, the reality of what is going on is really hitting her, and her confidence just kind of gets whittled away because she's not doing what she really wants to be doing.
She followed a guy to take that job.
Spoiler alert. Don't do that.
But yeah, and also there's sort of a back and forth. Like, she keeps trying to be strong and then she can't, and it's just like fighting it, and just what you captured in the performance of that evolution, because it's not just a straight line of, oh, I'm falling apart. She keeps trying to pull herself back up, and then...
And the difference that we've talked about, the difference of the first clip where she's overly confident and it's the back and forth and quick cuts and overlapping dialogue, to this is, telling of her with her character.
And what we talked about also is like when you move in on someone and making the most of the close-up of the closer shot, that's, slow move into her. It's incredible.
Thank you.
The Dana Glauberman effect, what can I say? So now we're going to go into a whole other chapter of Dana's career. 2019, she went into interview to work on The Mandalorian. Can you talk about that interview?
I can. So my agent, Jason Pagney, who is somewhere in the audience here, called me and said, so how do you feel about Star Wars? And The Mandalorian was looking for a third editor to come in, and I went and interviewed with Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni. And again, I was scared shitless because I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know the Star Wars world like so many other people do. This whole new technology of the volume, which I didn't know about, and went to set and met John and Dave, and John showed me around and explained the volume to me a little bit. And
Can you explain it briefly?
the volume is basically an LED wall, and it's a lot of planning that goes into it, but it's really interesting because it's basically the world that the actors are in. It takes away having to shoot on blue screen or green screen because the backgrounds are there. And it could be anything from just a sunset, which is great when you're shooting a sunset when you're at 12 o'clock in the afternoon or at 10 o'clock at night. It's still sunset because you could put the sunset up and you're not changing any kind of time of day.
And the lighting too.
The lighting stays the same, and it's a great, great, great tool. I find it's great for the actors because they don't have to imagine what's going to be there. And I find a lot of the actors' performances are a little bit better because they're in the environment that they're going to be in the final product.
So I'm sorry. So they took you to.
So they took me around. They introduced me to Bryce Dallas Howard, who was directing the episode that I edited, episode 4, The Sanctuary. And then we went upstairs and talked. And literally, I think that was a Thursday, and I was in the cutting room on Monday.
But you said to them, caveat. You said, I'm not a.
Oh yeah. So they asked if I was a Star Wars fan, and I don't remember exactly what I said, but I'm not the hugest Star Wars. I've seen the movies, but I don't know one Death Star from another. I don't know one lightsaber from another. Yet here I am, many seasons and many shows later, and I'm still there. But they really liked the fact that I wasn't a super fan because I could bring a different. I wasn't going about cutting it because of the super fandom that we had to be here because of X, Y, or Z. I was going about cutting it like I cut anything. And, just give me the material and give me the script, give me the material, and I'll cut it together.
Really smart of them to have the fresh eye, because most of those editors were like hardcore.
Hardcore.
This show you came on midstream, so they had already shot the previous and edited, but you did go on to Book of Boba Fett and Ahsoka, which, by the way, it's just dropped, and Dana edited the first episode, and it's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So now you're like a veteran. But you were saying that the first you cut the previs and then you cut the final. So can you talk about the challenges of cutting previs, the advantages, disadvantages, or whatever your experience was facing this new world?
So when I started on The Mandalorian, basically what had happened was there was one editor on it originally. He realized that he couldn't cut everything. So they brought on, the first editor was Jeff Siebenek. The second editor, they brought on Andrew Eisen, and they thought they were both going to be able to cut the whole thing. And then episode 4, Bryce's episode, was kind of in the background, not really being worked on that much. Here I come in, so previs had already been shot. A lot of the dailies, a lot of the production had already been shot. And so, I looked at the previs cut, which was kind of new to me because I didn't really know, and there were actors who weren't actors, people in the office literally saying the lines, and not actors, weren't able to perform the way that you want a real actor to perform. And I was so confused. I was like, I don't know what I'm watching. But it all worked out great. And then so going on to the Book of Boba Fett, so I was on Mandalorian in 2019, pre-pandemic, but I had already committed to going on to Ghostbusters Afterlife, who I co-edited with Nathan Orloff. And so I had this long break during the pandemic, and then they recruited me back for the Book of Boba Fett, and I did episode 6, which basically we, on these shows, we cut the episode twice. We cut it during previs with bad actors saying the lines or bad non-actors saying the lines. And then we get the real material and we cut it again. Now the previs basically is a guide to what we're going to shoot. And it's also very important for the visual effects department because that's how they know what they're going to put on the volume wall. The parallax of the camera is basic, everything moves with the camera move.
Right.
So they have a lot of planning to do. And so we spent a lot of time during previs with, we're in tons of meetings with the DP, director, producers, and the visual effects department. And I kind of just sit back and kind of observe and take notes. And but the DP and the director and the visual effects department are all kind of, doing their thing. And then, we get into, the other thing on the Book of Boba Fett is I worked a lot with deepfake which is kind of interesting because we're going into another panel after this with AI. So. Yeah. But yeah, it was wild to work with deepfake because I had never done that before either. And being that, not the Star Wars superfan, I was working with an actor named Graham Hamilton who was Luke Skywalker, and the visual effects department took images of the real Luke Skywalker, Mark Hamill, as a young guy, and basically put this deep fake. I was working with literally a square over our actor's face that had a sort of a, not so great deep fake version. It was early, but it all worked out beautifully. But I'm kind of jumping all over the place.
No, but no, this is great because what I thought was interesting is it's kind of comes full circle. Your wonderful sensitivity about performance and what you bring to every project. And that I love that you said so you were frustrated using that the glass.
So I would turn that off.
Yeah, because you couldn't see the eyes and the face, so you went back to his original, Graham Hamilton's original performance, and went with that because that's where you could really craft it and then it was very useful to them later because that was their template. And so you brought your kind of old school gifts to them and then they went with it.
Right.
Which is great. And also, we should run this clip of Mandalorian because one of the things, again, we're getting into performance and what you have to work with. And I love that.
Eyes. And no eyes.
Eyes and no eyes. Because Mando, the challenge of an editor, so you have his helmet, right? You don't see his eyes or his face. And what's so interesting about editing, it's like the coolest shelf experiment or whatever, you put what the audience wants to feel, they're also putting themselves into it, but you have to craft something where you don't see his eyes and his face, but there's, I mean, that episode, there's that romantic stuff going on, and the clip we're showing you, you know, you see a little of that where, like a cock of his head, or like you have to make it seem like a performance when there's so little to work with. I mean,
Even with Baby Yoda.
And Baby Yoda, the little green guy they call him. I love the editors called the little green guy, but you know, just I think that's so interesting that. But you said, of course, you have the freedom to put any line on over it. I mean, you can just put any line in because his mouth isn't moving, so that you had that freedom. Mm-hmm. But I just think it's interesting, the challenge of working with what you have, and it worked. Like you really put a lot of meaning into. Oh, he just did that. That's because he feels that, because that's what I want him to feel, and that's what you know I want.
Literally take anything from any part of the scene. If he just does this, you can take that and use it as whatever insert, whatever you want.
But it's again, you have your finger on the audience's pulse. You know what you want, the audience wants them to think, or you want them to think, and it's laden, that head cock means something because there's a reaction that you know the audience is going to feel something. So do you want to say, this is it? Oh, and this clip we're going to show, the first part is in the volume, and you kind of see the difference between the first part and the second part. Do you want to talk? We'll talk about the fight later.
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
Okay, so we can run the clip. Thank you.
Welcome, travelers. Can I interest you in anything?
Bone broth for the little one.
Oh, well, you're in luck. I just took down a Gringer, so there's plenty. Can I interest you in a porringer of broth as well?
How can we not include that in this?
That became a meme. Oh,
the biggest meme.
You said you really believed that the puppet was a person.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I end up having relationships with all these people, and with, Mando, who has a mask on or a helmet on, and Baby Yoda, I even cutting previs. Yeah. I literally feel like they're real people.
Can you describe what previs looked like?
Previs was interesting because the previous team that we had, I think on all of the shows, they took scans of Rosario Dawson for Ahsoka. Mm-hmm. The previous version of Ahsoka looked like Rosario. So it's basically just, computer images of these people moving around.
And you said you were very emotionally involved in that.
I was incredibly emotionally involved. I treated previs as if they were real actors.
And, I just spent years writing a book about Pixar editors and computer animation editors. And what was so interesting to me is, the flexibility of this medium. It's not exactly like animation, but it is sort of. And in that, the beauty of it is that as an editor, you can or cannot be involved in, like when you had the Zoom meetings with the DP and the director, and he's showing the camera plan, you can say, I need this angle. I didn't get this angle, and they can get it for you. So you have more control than in live action, and it's really interesting. Yeah. Okay, so can you talk about the fight scene?
Gina Carano did all of her own stunts because she's an MMA fighter. Mm-hmm. And so she really knew how to take a punch and, throw a punch and whatnot. And the stunt double of Mando, I think that was, I don't remember, it was either Brendan Wayne or our other stunt guy. And, there's little tricks, like when we would, cutting fights like that to me are much easier than cutting dialogue, because cutting dialogue, you are looking for performance and you're looking for those beats, but cutting a fight scene is literally choreographed. So you just, have to, the hardest part, I think, is finding what camera angle you want to use. But little tricks that Jon Favreau had said to me was literally if to make one of the actors look more badass, like they're really punching, just remove one frame right before the punch, right before they go in for the punch. Just remove one frame to actually get that impact a little bit harder. And I started doing that. I'm like, wow, that's pretty awesome.
So
So
cool.
now I've carried it on to all the other shows.
One of the things about Up in the Air that was so impressive about the movie, of course, was the score. It was a very original score, very unique to the film. Did you get a little bit of that? Were you working with the composer?
No, not till much later.
So they were influenced by your editing to create the score.
Yeah, yeah.
Excellent.
And Jason really is hands-on with the composers that he hires, and yeah, they'll go off into the studio and kind of work on stuff. But Jason also has in the past stripped out certain, and I'm sure every director has done it, just stripped out certain instruments that aren't necessarily working. But yeah, I didn't work with any of the score in cutting.
So they'd never come back to you also and alter a little bit to
No,
make a montage?
not really. They worked
Excellent.
with what I had. And speaking of which, just really quick, and I've talked about this many times before, when I'm putting my first cut together, I don't use music or sound effects and that's the way I've kind of been taught, and I think it's partly because of the, working on film and only having your picture and your mag track. But I literally, if a scene plays without music and sound effects, then you have a good scene. I think music and sound effects just help enhance the scene. And so for me, because I'm not the fastest of editors and I take the time to actually go through everything, I just want to focus on editing the scene as it's scripted, and then I let my assistants, something with like a fight, of course punches help, but I let my assistants, kind of handle the sound effects and music.
Yeah, and it can cover up problems. It can soften. You're seeing it. Like,
but if you watch it dries, then you have to fix it. I find you have to fix those problems.
It's much more exposes.
And then what did you think when you finally saw the final film with the score in it?
Loved.
Yeah.
Loved. It's a film that I'm very proud of.
You should be.
Thank you. Someone over here had a question.
Yeah.
Did you have to audition a lot of things with that, or did it just kind of happen?
I don't remember specifically. We had a great sound team. Ear Candy Post, Perry Robertson, Scott Sanders, and Kevin Zimmerman. And I think they kind of created a lot of that sound. The room tone specifically it just captures a lot, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to ask if there was ever a moment where something that you learned early in your career, either as a post-BA or as an assistant, that became very helpful later. So, years and years after being an assistant, you went back and realized that one piece you learned, very early on was the missing piece that helped you solve whatever issue you were dealing with.
That's a very good question. We've talked about the comma period thing. That's a big thing that I use all the time. Eye blinks are a big thing. Don't cut on, somebody starting to close their eyes. There's an interesting trick, though, that I learned when you're cutting, the A side of it, when you're cutting into somebody, it's okay to, if you catch them on when they're opening their eyes, you don't really catch the eye blink, but cutting out away from somebody, it either allow them to finish their blink or cut out before they start to blink will make a huge difference in smoothing out a cut. Little things like that.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Sure. Giving away my secrets. It depends on the director, honestly. Most of it is, I've socialized with some of the directors before, but it's mostly professional. The work-life balance is very difficult. And I wish schedules allowed for a little bit more, allowed us to have a little bit more of a work-life balance and not necessarily work 12 hours a day, but it's also dependent on the project and it's dependent on the schedule that you have. During dailies, I'll put in my own time on the weekends just to sort of catch up with things that I haven't been able to get to, which is probably not a real kosher thing to do, but it makes me personally feel better. But work-life balance is tough. I mean, I've had to, even when I was an assistant, I had to cancel many plans, and it's unfortunate.
When you've made an edit or cut, right, and then later you've gone back and saw the edit, what changed, and you wanted to change it. What changed for you? What experiences that you had that, you felt like, okay, I could have did certain things differently?
Most of it for me is just timings of the cuts, like trimming out a few frames too early or a few frames too late or staying on a shot too long. Because honestly, I don't remember some of the things that were shot. So I couldn't necessarily, I don't necessarily wish that I was in a different angle. Most of it is just trims here and there and timing of, the timing of things.
Gotcha. And then the last part is that something that you feel gets better the more experience that you get, where next time you go back and you see something that you've edited, there will be many changes that you think that you need? Is this something that, as you become more seasoned?
I learn something new on every single project that I work on, being the volume or little techniques or, just from working with various people and new people. You kind of share little tips and share ideas on how you do things. But yeah, I do think that every project gets a little bit better with my skills and how I approach different scenes.
We have to end this, I'm sorry, but thank you all again for coming. And Dana.
Bobbie, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you all.
Thank you.